The chandelier sparkled above the Beverly Hilton ballroom, like stars pretending to be at peace. Outside, paparazzi yelled names. Inside, tuxedos mingled with traditional African fabrics, and champagne floated on trays like hopes not yet grounded. This was the Voices of Africa Global Unity Gala 2025, a glamorous charity night meant to raise funds for youth education across Africa. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. The MC's voice, slightly nervous, echoed. And now, a surprise appearance. Please welcome President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. Gasps. He hadn't been on the speaker list. Some guests even thought it was a joke. Traoré walked up slowly. No bodyguards, no script, no entourage. Just a 36-year-old leader with calm eyes, a tailored brown boo-boo, and hands in his pockets, like he had nothing to prove. Hollywood elite turned their heads. Some smirked, others whispered. A soft drumbeat played in the background as he reached the mic. Traoré looked around the room, then stared straight into the camera like he was staring into the soul of the internet itself. And then, with the calmness of a lion at sunrise, he said, "Tonight, I'm not here as a president. I'm here as a comedian's nightmare." The room froze. People didn't know whether to laugh or run. Meryl Streep dropped her fork. Trevor Noah leaned forward, visibly nervous. Even Kevin Hart, seated front row, tilted his head like he'd just heard the start of a roast session in South Philly. Traoré cleared his throat, raised an eyebrow, and said, "Hollywood has shown Africa in 3 ways: hungry, violent, or magical." Laughter. "You made us lions, or dying children, but never engineers, never thinkers, never the guy who invented the traffic light, who, by the way, was African American." A louder laugh from the back. He paced slowly. "We've seen Wakanda. Great movie. But let's be honest. It was the first time Africans in Hollywood had clean water, Wi-Fi, and a budget. This time, a mix of gasps and full-blown belly laughter. Even Lupita Nyong'o covered her face, laughing in disbelief. So tonight, allow me to roast back." He turned toward Kevin Hart. "Kevin, you're a proud black man. You've climbed to the top. But my brother, you still need a stepladder to hug the rock." Kevin slid halfway under the table, crying with laughter. "I may be young and African, Kevin, but at least I don't need a ladder to reach the mic." The room exploded. Within 17 minutes, the clip hit the internet. By midnight, it had 10 million views. By morning, 40 million. Traoré, roast. Reich, Kevin can't breathe. Africa Speaks Back headlines spun like they'd never seen an African president be funny, honest, and real. "Who is this guy?" asked CNN. "Smartest mic drop of the decade," wrote Trevor Noah on X. Even Kevin Hart reposted the clip with a caption, "Bro ended my career and woke up the world in 1 sentence." But there was more to it. Behind the laughter, people started thinking. Clips of Traoré speaking truth wrapped in humor trended globally. Universities replayed his jokes in lectures on cultural diplomacy. High school kids in Ghana and Chicago memorized his punchlines. And something deeper stirred. A video leaked, one taken moments before Traoré walked on stage. In it, he's backstage, pacing, and in a whisper barely audible, he said, "They only hear us when we joke, so let me turn our pain into punchlines." Then he smiled sadly, clenched his fists, and walked into the spotlight. That clip hit 22 million views in a day, because suddenly people saw what no scriptwriter had planned. The revolution had a mic, and it knew how to roast. 3 days after the gala, a journalist asked Ibrahim Traoré, "How did it feel to make the world laugh?" He paused, and then said something no one expected. "It felt like crying." The room fell silent. He looked down, his voice softer now. When a child in Burkina Faso watches Hollywood, they don't see themselves. They see what the world thinks they are. Weak, poor, dangerous, irrelevant. So, I became the joke, not to humiliate, but to heal. Flashback videos surfaced of Traoré as a teenager, reading poetry under candlelight in a town with no electricity. He was once mocked for reading Chinua Achebe in public. "Who do you think you are, boy? A white man?" But he kept reading, and he kept listening, and he learned that sometimes people will only hear the truth if it's told between laughs. Because laughter disarms. It opens the heart. That night at the gala, he didn't just make fun of Hollywood. He cracked the mask they'd placed over Africa, and under that mask was something powerful. Dignity. One woman commented under the viral video, "I laughed so hard, then cried so much. I didn't know I needed to hear this." Millions agreed. Kevin Hart couldn't sleep. He rewatched the clip for the 5th time. At first, it was just hilarious. But the more he watched it, the more it hurt. Not because he was roasted, but because he knew Traoré was right. Kevin picked up his phone and called his manager. "Get me his number." Later that evening, across continents, the FaceTime rang, and Traoré picked up with the same calm grin. "Kevin Hart, still alive after the roast?" Kevin laughed, but then went quiet. "Yo, man, real talk. That was powerful. You killed me for real. But you woke something up in me too." Traoré nodded. Kevin added, "I've done shows all over. But not once. Not once have I been to Africa to perform. Let's fix that." Silence. Then Traoré leaned into the camera and whispered, "Come to Burkina Faso, but not just for laughs. Come meet the kids. Hear their dreams." Kevin stared at him, deeply moved. Bet. That call changed everything. And 2 days later, Kevin Hart announced the Mike the Mission Tour, Africa 2025. Every ticket sold. Funds went to African youth education, and the tears, they were just getting started. In a dusty village outside Ouagadougou, a boy named Seydou, age 11, sat on a wooden stool, watching Traoré's gala speech on a cracked smartphone screen. He didn't laugh. He watched it again, then again. His eyes were wide, face expressionless, like he couldn't believe a man who looked like him, who spoke like him, could stand on a world stage and make Hollywood laugh without begging for approval. Seydou's father had been a roadside mechanic, died during a fuel shortage riot. His mother, a vegetable seller, illiterate. She called Traoré the boy with fire in his blood. But Seydou? He started dreaming again. At school the next day, he stood up in front of his class and whispered, "One day I'll take the mic too." His teacher laughed, not to mock, but because she recognized something. Belief. Across Africa, across America, millions of kids like Seydou, from Detroit to Dakar, watched the roast not just as entertainment, but as proof that they were seen, heard, and that dignity can be loud, even funny. And in the middle of it all, a new nickname trended, Traoré the Truth Teller. The revolution had gone viral, and it had a new voice. It didn't take long. Within a week, as love for Traoré's roast swept across the globe, the first backlash began. A conservative talk show host on U.S. primetime said, "He humiliated American greatness. That wasn't comedy. That was propaganda." Another pundit added, "We welcomed him to our soil and he mocked us. That's not leadership. That's arrogance in African clothing." But the internet fired back. Celebrities, youth activists, teachers, even war veterans began defending him. One retired U.S. Marine posted, "That man said more truth in 6 minutes than Congress has in 6 months, and he did it with a smile." Still, the pressure grew. Anonymous sources leaked false stories. Edited clips of Traoré were broadcast out of context, twisted to make him look angry, aggressive. Burkina Faso's embassy in Washington received threats. Inside his modest home in Ouagadougou, Traoré sat with a single lamp on. His advisors warned him, "Sir, this could get dangerous." But he only smiled and said, "When they can't control your truth, they try to control your image." Then he looked out the window and whispered to himself, "Let them come. My mic is louder than their fear." Across the ocean, in a quiet town in Alabama, a retired 74-year-old teacher named Mrs. Joanna Baker sat on her porch with tears running down her cheeks. She had just finished watching Traoré's full roast for the 6th time. Her grandson had shown it to her, thinking she'd laugh. Instead, she wept. You see, Mrs. Baker had once taught at a segregated school. She remembered the stares, the fear, the guilt, but she also remembered her students, bright black boys and girls who were told their history began with chains. She picked up a pen and wrote, "Dear President Traoré, you don't know me, but I taught children who were broken by lies. Tonight, I watched you rebuild them, with laughter, with power, with grace. I don't have much time left, but thank you. Thank you for being the teacher this world needed. I hope this letter finds you." She mailed it to the Burkina Faso embassy in D.C. The staff almost didn't open it. It looked like junk mail. But when Traoré read it, he went silent for a long time. And that night, for the first time in months, he cried. Days later, the United Nations announced a global youth culture summit in New York. They invited presidents, performers, and cultural icons to speak about media, youth, and identity. But the last seat on the panel, reserved. It had a tag that read, "For the truth teller." Traoré was asked to open the summit with the same thing that made him go viral, humor. But this time, he hesitated. Not out of fear, but something deeper. Responsibility. He walked alone into the empty UN chamber the night before, stood behind the podium, looked out at the seats where world leaders would sit. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out Mrs. Baker's letter. He placed it gently on the podium. "Let this speak too," he whispered. The next day, when the lights came on and the cameras rolled, Traoré stepped up once again. But he didn't start with a joke. He started with a whisper. This isn't about laughter anymore. It's about memory, dignity, and the mic we give our children. And for the next 5 minutes, the world didn't blink. The truth was no longer hiding in humor. It was standing, tall and unshaken, with the whole world watching. When Kevin Hart's private jet touched down in Ouagadougou, crowds had already gathered. But there were no red carpets, no flashing lights, just barefoot children lining the dusty road, holding handmade signs. "Welcome, Mr. Latter. One mic, one love." Kevin stepped out with no bodyguards, no entourage, just his backpack and a heart full of nerves. Traoré was there waiting, dressed in a simple white caftan. They hugged. It was genuine, not for the cameras. And then Kevin whispered, "I've never felt this seen." They drove for hours into the rural north, where Kevin met children in schools built from clay, powered by donated solar panels. One girl recited a poem she wrote about being invisible until she saw Traoré on TV. Kevin couldn't speak. Later, sitting under a baobab tree, he turned to Traoré and said, "This trip, it's not comedy anymore. It's confession." That night, he posted just one sentence to his 180 million followers. "Africa isn't broken. We just haven't been listening." And the internet shattered in tears. A voice had crossed oceans. But now a heart had followed. The team had planned a huge youth concert in Ouagadougou. Kevin would perform, Traoré would speak, and millions were watching via live stream. But 30 minutes before the show, the entire region lost power. Everything went black. No lights, No cameras, no microphones. Panic rippled through the crew. Technicians scrambled. Advisors whispered. Traoré stood still. Then slowly, he walked out onto the unlit stage. Thousands of confused youths sat waiting, their phone flashlights barely piercing the darkness. He raised his hand and spoke with no mic, just his voice. They took the power, but they can't take our fire. Then he shouted, "If you can hear me, light something up." In seconds, thousands of flashlights, lighters, even candles filled the air. Kevin walked out next. No jokes, just truth. This right here, this is power, not lights, not electricity, you. The whole crowd erupted, singing. The choir joined. A young boy started to cry. The live stream resumed hours later, only capturing the final moment. But that single frame, Traoré and Kevin, on a dark stage lit only by people's light, went viral across the globe. We are the power. Our lights came from us. No one watching that night stayed dry-eyed. Back in Alabama, Mrs. Joanna Baker waited. She had watched Kevin's speech, the candlelit stage, the chants echoing through the African night. She smiled, but her hands trembled. Her health was failing fast. She asked her nurse, "Did he ever reply to my letter?" The nurse didn't know, but she whispered, "Maybe he's writing one now." She nodded slowly, tears welling. Across the ocean, Traoré finally sat to write his response. Not as a president, but as a student of truth. He wrote, "Dear Mrs. Baker, your words were not a letter. They were a light. You reminded me that even in our final chapters we can still write beginnings for others. You saw through the noise and heard the music. Thank you for being my teacher too. Ibrahim." He sealed it in an envelope, marked urgent, but it was too late. That morning, a quiet obituary was printed in a local Alabama paper. Joanna Baker, 74, beloved teacher, quiet warrior, died peacefully in her sleep, smiling. Her grandson placed her favorite book, Things Fall Apart, on her chest, and in her hand, they tucked a photo of Traoré and Kevin on that candlelit stage. She never got the letter, but her message, it had already reached the world. In a quiet room in New York City, just hours before the Global Youth Culture Summit's final day, Traoré sat alone, staring at his speech. The world expected a powerful ending. They expected fireworks. But he felt a heavy silence in his chest. His phone buzzed, a message from Kevin Hart. "Ready to bring the house down?" Traoré smiled weakly and typed back, "Ready to bring down the walls." He knew this speech had to be more than words. It had to break barriers, racial, political, and emotional. He thought about Mrs. Baker, Seydou, the children in Burkina Faso, and Kevin's confession under the baobab tree. And then he closed his eyes, whispering, "For all who feel unseen, I stand with you." The next morning, as the chamber filled with world leaders and millions online, the atmosphere was electric, but tense, because everyone knew this wasn't just a speech. It was the moment of truth. The lights dimmed. Traoré walked up with no notes, just a steady gaze. He began softly, "I come to you not as a president, but as a son of a continent that has been silenced too long." He spoke of colonial shadows, of stolen stories, and of youth who dared to dream despite everything. His voice cracked when he said, "When I was a boy, I was told I would never speak on the world stage. Tonight I speak for all those silenced voices, from Seydou to Mrs. Baker." And then, surprising everyone, he smiled. "And yes, Kevin Hart, I'm still taller than you, but I promise, no ladder is needed to reach the truth." The crowd burst into laughter and applause, but then his tone shifted. "Our future isn't about heights or jokes. It's about hope. It's about lighting candles in the dark, standing when the world tells us to sit down, and raising our voices so no child ever feels invisible again. Tears flowed from leaders, performers, even hardened journalists. The room was silent except for one thing, a slow, steady clap from Kevin Hart. The speech ended. Cameras flashed, but something stayed in the air, a heavy, moving silence. No one left immediately. People stood frozen, clutching phones, wiping tears. The summit's host, a respected U.S. senator, came on stage and whispered, "That was not a speech. That was a gift." In the weeks that followed, the speech was replayed on every continent. Schools showed it. Families watched it together. Activists used it as a battle cry. And somewhere in Ouagadougou, a young girl named Awa hugged her mother and said, "I want to be like him, not just for Africa, for the whole world." The world had changed, not from force, not from power, but from one man's courage to laugh and then to cry in front of it all. Weeks after the summit, a small event happened that barely made headlines, but shook Traoré to the core. In Kaya, northern Burkina Faso, a village school with no internet or power held a candlelight ceremony. Why? They had replayed Traoré's speech. Someone had recorded the audio and biked 2 hours just to bring it to them. The students, mostly barefoot and underfed, lit candles in the dark. Each flame represented a dream: doctor, artist, teacher, president. A photo of the event surfaced on social media. The candles are back, not for light, but for courage. Traoré broke down in tears the moment he saw it. Even Kevin Hart, who had been touring again, reposted it with the caption, "Sometimes the greatest punchline is a spark." The world that had once laughed at Africa now listened, but something bigger was coming, something that would take the pain and turn it into permanent legacy. Just as the world thought the story had ended, Ibrahim Traoré made an announcement during a quiet press conference in Ouagadougou. His voice was calm, but the message shocked the world. "I will not seek another term as president." Gasps. Silence. Cameras clicked furiously. He continued, "Power should be passed like a torch, not clutched like a sword. I've said what I needed to say. Now it's time for others to speak. My next chapter? Education. I will travel the world and help the voiceless find their voice." A journalist cried on camera. Kevin Hart posted, "Who turns down power to teach? A true giant." From South Africa to Spain, the internet exploded. The president, who stepped down, Traoré legacy, "We will carry the torch." No one could believe it, but deep down, everyone knew it was exactly what he would do. 1 year later, Kevin Hart stood in the center of a newly built school in Burkina Faso. The walls were painted with quotes. Children wore bright uniforms. A giant plaque stood at the entrance. It read, "The Joanna Baker Center for Voices, founded by Ibrahim Traoré Friends." Kevin couldn't stop crying. The first class of students marched in. 200 kids, each one holding a candle. The last to enter was a girl named Awa. She walked up to Kevin, handed him a microphone, and whispered, "I think you can reach it now." Kevin looked up, saw the mic was perfectly placed at his height, and burst into tears, laughing and sobbing all at once. Traoré, standing beside him, nodded and whispered, "You don't need to reach the mic. You've already reached hearts." As the camera panned out, the children began to sing, soft, angelic voices rising into the evening air. "We are not small. We are not weak. We are the story the world forgot to speak." The screen faded to black, but the world didn't. The comments came flooding in. So did the tears and the hope. If this story touched your heart, even for a second, if it made you laugh, cry, or feel something you thought the world had forgotten, then let this be your candle. Leave a comment below telling us, what is your flame? What dream? What voice? What truth are you carrying? If you believe stories can heal, If you believe laughter can lead to legacy, if you believe in a world where leaders step down to lift others up, then don't just scroll. Click like, tap subscribe, and turn on the bell, because more voices like Traoré's are waiting to be heard. Share this with someone who needs light, and remember, you don't need a ladder to reach the mic. You just need the courage to speak.